Elara lived where the town of Covenant Creek gave up. Her world began where the last muddy track dissolved into pine needles and unforgiving stone. She was a woman grown from the granite of the northern bluffs, solitary and silent, possessing only a sway-backed pack horse named Jasper, a set of her father's tools, and the journals he had left behind. The journals were her only true inheritance, bound in cracked leather and filled with a dead man's precise, elegant script. They were a catechism of stone, wind, and thermal mass. She had been 13 years old when Covenant Creek had cast her out. An orphan, she had survived by gleaning what others discarded. One bitter afternoon, she was found gathering fallen scraps of lumber from behind the new mill owned by Silas Croft. They were split ends and unusable knots, destined for the burn pile. But Croft, a man whose charity was thinner than a winter shadow, declared it theft. He dragged her by her thin arm to the town hall. Mayor Thompson, newly elected and eager to project an image of order, saw an opportunity. He made an example of the girl. He did not send her to an orphanage, he simply exiled her. She was banished from the town proper, declared a scavenger, and forbidden from taking so much as a fallen apple from within the town's surveyed limits. Her crime was not stealing wood. It was the crime of being poor and alone in a place that valued appearances. So she had retreated to the unclaimed lands, to the bluffs where her father had once worked, a stonemason whose hands understood the language of rock. He had died when she was 10, leaving her with the journals and a memory of his quiet strength. For years, she lived in a lean-to, patched with scavenged canvas and hope, surviving on her knowledge of the forest. The town forgot her, a piece of human refuse swept conveniently out of sight. But Elara did not forget. And she read. Every night, by the light of a tallow lamp, she absorbed her father's words. He had been more than a mason. He was an engineer of the old school, a man who believed nature was not a beast to be tamed, but a partner in survival. The journals were filled with diagrams of Roman hypercausts, principles of geothermal exchange, and studies on the insulating properties of packed earth and snow. His final entries detailed a dream, a dwelling not built upon the land, but within it, a home carved from a south-facing granite bluff designed to capture the low winter sun and store its warmth deep within the rock. A shelter that used the crushing weight of the snows not as a threat, but as a blanket. A place that required only a handful of wood a day to remain temperate through the deepest freeze. One spring morning, when she was 22, Elara closed the last journal. She had read them all a dozen times. She knew the principles as well as her own name. She looked at her meager existence, at the wind that cut through her lean-to, and made a decision. She would not just survive on the edge of Covenant Creek. She would build her father's dream. She would build a fortress against the winter. Her first step took her back to the place that had rejected her. She walked into the town hall, her moccasins silent on the polished floorboards. She was a ghost from their past, tall and weathered, her face a mask of quiet determination. She approached the clerk's desk and asked for the public survey maps of the northern bluffs. Mayor Thompson was there, his hair now grey, but his posture just as self-important. He overheard her request. A slow, condescending smile spread across his face. He remembered the grubby girl. He saw the woman before him as no different. "Well now, Elara," he said, his voice dripping with false bonhomie. "What would a scavenger need with official survey lines? Planning to build a castle?" The clerk snickered. Elara met his gaze without flinching. Her voice was low and even, the sound of stones rubbing together. "I am building a home," she said. "In the bluff." The mayor stared at her for a moment, waiting for the joke. When he saw none was forthcoming, he let out a short, sharp laugh. "In the bluff? You mean like a badger, digging a hole for yourself?" He shook his head, the amusement turning to pitying scorn. "That's madness. It'll be a damp, dark tomb. You'll catch your death of lung fever before the first frost." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, turning back to his important papers. But the story was too good to keep to himself. Within a day, all of Covenant Creek knew of Elara's mad plan. It became the town's favourite new joke. Silas Croft, now the richest man in the territory, was building a new manor for himself on a hill overlooking the town. It was a monument to his success, a sprawling structure of sawn lumber, intricate gingerbread trim, and enormous panes of glass imported from the east. When he heard of Elara's project, he laughed until his portly stomach shook. "She's building her own grave," he bellowed to the men at the general store. "While I build a testament to progress, she's digging a hole like a savage. Let her. It's what she deserves." The town's physician, Dr. Aris Thorne, a man who placed his faith in modern science and sanitation, felt compelled to weigh in. He wrote a letter to the small local newspaper, a treatise on the dangers of what he called primitive troglodytic habitation. He wrote of miasmas, of the inevitable dampness that bred consumption, of the psychological toll of living without proper light and air. He concluded that such a project was not just foolish, but a dangerous step backward for a civilized community. The community absorbed the scorn of its leaders and made it their own. They gave her project a name: Elara's Folly. The children would sometimes venture near the edge of her claim, hiding in the trees to watch her work, chanting the name like a nursery rhyme. The phrase, "pulling an Elara," quickly entered the local lexicon. It meant to embark on a task of monumental effort and absolute foolishness, to waste one's life on a mad dream. Elara heard the whispers. She saw the pointing fingers when she made her rare trips to the edge of town to trade pelts for salt and iron. She ignored them. Their words were wind. The rock was real. The work was real. The work began. It was a slow, brutal ballet of human will against geologic time. The first year was a battle of earth and scree. With Jasper harnessed to a stone boat and a system of levers and pulleys her father had sketched in his journals, she moved tons of soil and loose rock from the base of the south-facing bluff. She was not merely digging. She was clearing the way to the solid heart of the mountain. The town saw a lone woman and a horse moving dirt. They saw a fool's errand. They did not see the meticulous planning. She had chosen the location with care, a place where a natural wide overhang would protect the entrance from the worst of the weather. She cleared an area 50 feet wide and 20 feet deep, creating a sun-drenched terrace that would one day be her doorstep. Then came the stone. She did not have dynamite. She had a sledgehammer, a set of star drills, and an unyielding patience. She found the natural fissures in the granite, the weaknesses the mountain itself offered up. For months, her world was the rhythmic clang of steel on steel, the sharp crack of splitting rock, and the grating sound of stone being levered from its ancient bed. She drilled and hammered, creating holes for wedges. She would soak the wooden wedges with water, and over the course of a cold night, the ice would expand with silent, irresistible force, cracking loose massive slabs of granite. It was a technique as old as the pyramids, a lesson learned from her father's notes. The townspeople saw only a woman chipping away at a cliff face. They did not see the design taking shape. The entrance was angled precisely to block the northern winds. Just inside, she carved a deep, stone-lined pit into the floor. A cold sink, designed to trap any frigid air that might breach the doorway. She spent an entire summer quarrying soapstone from a deposit 2 miles up the creek. It was soft and easy to work, but heavy. Jasper earned his oats 100 times over, hauling the grey-green slabs back to the site. From this stone, she built the heart of the home, a massive hearth and chimney system. The flue was not a straight shot to the sky. It snaked through a carefully constructed wall of rock, a thermal battery designed to capture the heat of the smoke itself, warming the stone mass long after the fire had died to embers. A second, smaller flue, higher up the wall, would serve as a constant source of ventilation, pulling fresh air in from a shielded vent near the floor. It was a living, breathing system. She worked through the searing heat of 2 summers and the biting winds of 2 autumns. The Folly grew. A main chamber took shape, then a smaller sleeping alcove and a storage room dug deep into the coldest part of the bluff. Against the western wall of the cliff, she built a sturdy, insulated stall for Jasper, accessible from both inside and out. The mockery from the town faded from active jeering into a kind of accepted local folklore. She was no longer a joke. She was a landmark. As stubborn as Elara at her rock, they would say. They watched her progress from a distance, a constant, perplexing feature of their landscape. They saw her hauling timbers salvaged from fire-scarred sections of the forest. They did not understand she was building only what was necessary. A frame for a bed, a sturdy table, and long shelves to line the storage chamber. The rock itself provided the walls, the ceiling, the floor. The 4th year was the year of soil and sustenance. She hauled hundreds of loads of rich topsoil to the flat roof of the bluff above her dwelling. There, she built a series of low, stone-walled terraces. It was to be a garden, positioned to be buried under the winter snows. The snow, she knew from the journals, would act as a perfect insulator, protecting the dormant soil and the roots of the perennials she planted from the killing deep freeze. That autumn, she did not work on the stone. She harvested. Her garden yielded a surprising bounty. She foraged in the woods for mushrooms, berries, and roots. She set traps and hunted, taking only what she needed. The smoke that rose from her chimney was constant as she smoked venison and fish. Her main chamber was filled with the sharp, sweet smell of drying herbs and apples. She filled hundreds of clay jars with preserved vegetables, berries, and rendered fat. The scale of her preservation was staggering. It was not the work of a woman preparing for winter. It was the work of a woman preparing for a siege. By the 5th autumn, it was done. The dwelling was complete. The shelves were full. The woodpile, stacked in a dry alcove near the entrance, was tall and neat. Elara's Folly was no longer a construction site. It was a home. A silent, stone sanctuary, waiting for the test it was built for. The signs began subtly. She noticed it first in the squirrels. They were not just gathering, they were frantic, their movements jerky and desperate. They stripped the pine trees bare, creating massive caches that seemed impossibly large for the coming season. They were preparing for more than just a hard winter. They were preparing for an apocalypse. Then came the birds, the great flocks of geese that usually lingered until the first snows were gone, weeks early, their honking calls a faint, mournful echo from a sky that was too blue, too clear. The smaller birds fell silent. The woods, usually alive with chirps and calls, held a deep, unnerving quiet. One evening, a metallic taste filled the air, like the scent of ozone after a lightning strike. But there were no clouds. The air itself felt heavy, compressed. A dull pressure began to build behind Elara's eyes, a familiar ache she recognized from her father's journals. He had described it perfectly. She retrieved the oldest journal, the one detailing the long winter of his own youth. He wrote of the same signs, the frantic squirrels, the early migration, the strange silence. And he wrote of the barometer his own father had kept, how it had plunged to a low he had never seen before or since. He described a pressure in his skull, a feeling that the sky itself was pressing down upon the land. Elara felt that pressure now. It was a physical warning from the world itself. The winter that was coming would not be ordinary. It would be a thing of mythic violence. She stood on her stone terrace and looked down the valley toward Covenant Creek. The lights of the town twinkled in the dusk. Smoke curled from the chimneys of their proud, foolish houses. She saw the new roof of Silas Croft's manor, a dark slash against the sky. She saw the warm glow from Dr. Thorne's study window. For a moment, she felt a pang of something akin to duty. She considered walking into the town. She imagined standing before Mayor Thompson, trying to explain what the squirrels and the sky were telling her. She pictured the smirks, the condescending dismissal. They would call her the mad woman from the Bluff, a prophet of doom, trying to scare them with old wives' tales. They had mocked her work for 5 years. They would never, ever heed her warning. Her words would be just another foolish act, another example of pulling an Elara. Her duty was not to them. Her duty was to the wisdom in her hands, to the knowledge her father had preserved. Her duty was to the stone and the preparation. She turned her back on the twinkling lights of the town that had never wanted her. She spent the next 2 days in a state of calm, methodical finality. She brought Jasper into his insulated stall, giving him a double ration of oats and fresh water. She checked the seal on her heavy wooden door, a tongue and groove design she had spent a month perfecting. She packed the final gaps with a mixture of moss and clay. She brought a week's worth of firewood inside and stacked it near the soapstone hearth, knowing it was more than she would likely need. She was not battening down the hatches. She was sealing a world. On the evening of November the 12th, she ate her supper, banked the fire to a gentle glow, and sat at her table to read. The pressure in her head was a throbbing ache. Outside, the world had gone completely, deathly still. Not a whisper of wind, not a sound. It was the deep breath the world takes before it screams. The storm did not arrive with a gentle dusting of snow. It struck Covenant Creek at 2 in the morning with the force of a physical blow. The wind came first, a solid wall of air that shrieked down from the north. It was a sound no one in the town had ever heard before, a high, predatory howl that seemed to tear at the very foundations of their homes. The great, beautiful windows of Silas Croft's new manor were the first to go. They did not crack, they exploded inward, spraying the ornate parlours with razor-sharp shards of glass. The 60-mile-an-hour wind followed, a torrent of killing cold that extinguished lamps and ripped paintings from the walls. In seconds, the proudest house in Covenant Creek was an uninhabitable vortex of ice and wind. Croft and his family, huddled in an interior hallway, could only listen as their monument to progress was dismantled around them. Then came the snow. It was not flakes, but a horizontal blizzard of fine, hard particles that scoured paint from wood and blinded anyone foolish enough to look outside. It fell with an impossible speed, driven by the wind into drifts that grew not by inches, but by feet every hour. The town's infrastructure, built for ordinary winters, failed in a catastrophic cascade. The roof of the general store, its trusses designed for a standard snow load, groaned under the immense, sudden weight. Shortly before dawn, it collapsed with a sound like thunder, burying the town's main supply of food and goods under tons of splintered timber and snow. Dr. Thorne's well-built house lost its chimney to a savage gust of wind, the brick tearing away and leaving a gaping hole in the roof. The fire in his hearth was instantly sucked out, replaced by a plume of snow that filled the room. The town was cut off, paralyzed. The world was reduced to a screaming whiteness and a cold that felt personal, malevolent. It was a white death, descended from the sky to punish their pride. The supply trains would not be coming. The roads were gone. The wells began to freeze. The social fabric of Covenant Creek, stretched thin by fear and cold, began to tear. Inside Elara's Folly, the world was serene. The storm was not a shriek, but a distant, muffled hum, the sound of a great beast prowling far away. The thick stone walls and the tons of earth above them absorbed the wind's fury completely. Not a single draught stirred the air inside. The soapstone hearth, holding the heat from the embers she had banked hours before, radiated a gentle, constant warmth throughout the main chamber. A thermometer her father had built, hanging on the wall, registered a steady 65 degrees. The air was fresh, cycling slowly through the ingenious ventilation system that was now buried under 6 feet of insulating snow. Elara had slept through the storm's arrival. She awoke at her usual hour, tended to Jasper, and prepared her breakfast. She ate a bowl of oatmeal with dried berries, sitting at her simple wooden table. The only light came from her tallow lamp, its small flame casting a warm, steady glow on the pages of her father's journal. She spent the day reading, mending a leather harness, and living her life in the quiet, insulated heart of the mountain. The apocalypse, raging just a few feet above her head, was of no consequence. She was safe. She was warm. She was right. For 3 days, the storm raged without pause. In Covenant Creek, the situation grew desperate. Families huddled together in the few rooms that could still be heated, burning their own furniture to stay alive. The food they had in their larders was dwindling. The first deaths came quietly. An elderly couple who lived on the edge of town, their cabin buried in a drift, their fire long since extinguished. Frostbite was rampant. Hope was freezing solid. On the 4th day, a figure was seen struggling through the waist-deep snow. It was Dr. Aris Thorne. His fine coat was torn, his face a mask of purpled, frost-bitten flesh. His scientific certainty had frozen and shattered. He had been guided by a faint, almost imperceptible plume of heat haze rising from a small, snow-covered mound. The top of Elara's chimney flue. He had stumbled toward it, his last hope, the primitive folly he had so publicly condemned. He collapsed against the heavy wooden door, his hands too numb to knock. Elara, hearing the faint thud, was not surprised. She had been expecting them. She unbarred the door, swinging it inward. Dr. Thorne fell into the entrance, a broken, half-frozen man. He looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief at the warmth that enveloped him. He saw the calm, well-lit space, the glowing hearth, the quiet woman standing before him. Shame and desperation warred on his face. Elara said nothing. There was no, "I told you so." There was no gloating. There was only a simple, profound act of grace. She helped him to his feet, led him to a stool by the fire, and ladled a steaming mug of broth into his trembling hands. The welcome was absolute and unconditional. He was the first. An hour later, 2 more arrived, the general store owner and his family, their faces etched with terror. Their roof had collapsed completely. They followed the doctor's tracks, a lifeline in the white wasteland. Again, Elara met them with silence and succor. They kept coming. A slow, desperate procession of the humbled. A family whose food had run out. A young couple whose newborn was shivering with cold. Each time the door opened, it was to admit another of her mockers, another person who had laughed at her folly. And each time, they were met not with scorn, but with warmth, food, and a quiet space to recover. Elara became their leader without ever seeking the role. She organized the growing crowd, assigning sleeping spaces. She distributed her vast stores of food, rationing them carefully, but ensuring everyone had enough. She moved with a calm efficiency that shamed them all. This was not madness. This was the most profound sanity they had ever witnessed. On the 5th day, the last 2 arrived. Mayor Thompson, his face a grey mask of defeat, was half carrying Silas Croft, who was delirious with fever, his feet badly frostbitten. They were the architects of her exile, the chief voices of the town's scorn. They stumbled into the warmth of Elara's folly, the last refugees from the world of pride they had built. Silas Croft looked around the smooth stone walls, at the shelves laden with food, at the faces of his neighbors lit by the gentle firelight. He looked at the woman he had accused of stealing scrapwood, the woman now saving his life. A dry, rattling sob escaped his chest. The great man was broken. The shelter built by the scavenger was now the only thing keeping the town's elite alive. The great storm lasted for 9 full days. When the wind finally died and the snow stopped falling, the sun rose on a world transformed. Covenant Creek was gone, buried under 20 feet of snow. Only the very tops of the tallest roofs were visible. It was a town entombed in white. But its people, some 70 souls, were alive. They were crowded but warm, hungry but fed, living inside the miracle their ignorance had scorned. After the storm broke, but before the digging out could truly begin, Mayor Thompson called for a town meeting. It was held right there, in the main chamber of Elara's dwelling. The people sat on the floor, on crates, on blankets, their faces pale in the lamplight. Mayor Thompson stood, his posture no longer proud, but stooped with the weight of his failure. His voice was hoarse, cracking with emotion. He looked at Elara, who stood by the hearth, watching him with her unreadable calm. "I have no right to speak as your mayor," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "I have only the right to speak as a fool." He took a deep breath. "We were wrong. All of us. We were proud. We were arrogant. We believed our modern ways made us safe, made us smart." He gestured to the stone walls around them. "We called this a folly. We called it a grave. We laughed." His voice grew stronger. "This place, this home, is the only reason we are not all frozen in our beds. We did not listen. We mocked the one person who had the wisdom to see what was coming." He looked directly at Elara, his eyes filled with a shame so profound it was painful to witness. "You were right. We were wrong. I am sorry." Then Silas Croft, his frostbitten feet wrapped in clean linen, struggled to his feet, leaning on the doctor. "My house," he rasped, "was a monument to my pride. It is a tomb of ice. This burrow, as I called it, this is a true home. It was built with wisdom, not with vanity. He, too, looked at Elara. You tried to take scrap wood, and I had you cast out. You have given me back my life. There is no apology deep enough for my foolishness. The room was silent. All eyes turned to Elara. They expected anger, bitterness, a litany of her grievances. They would have understood. They might have even welcomed it as a deserved penance. But Elara simply nodded. She stepped forward, her voice calm and even, carrying to every corner of the crowded space. My father wrote in his journals that pride does not keep you warm. He wrote that a glass window is just a thin piece of ice that has not yet frozen. Wisdom is not in building higher, but in building smarter. It is knowing what the mountain knows, that the wind is patient and the cold is absolute. She looked over the faces of the people who had been her tormentors and were now her refugees. Survival is not about pride. It is about preparation. What my father knew, I now know. This knowledge is here. It is in the stone and the earth. If you are willing to learn, I am willing to teach. And so began the spring of rebuilding. Under Elara's quiet tutelage, the people of Covenant Creek did not just dig out their town. They reimagined it. They abandoned their flimsy wooden structures and their proud, inefficient designs. They began to build with stone and earth, following the principles laid down in her father's journals. Silas Croft, humbled and transformed, used what remained of his fortune to open up the soapstone quarry, providing the material for new, efficient hearths for every family. The phrase, pulling an Elara, was reborn. It no longer meant a fool's errand. It came to mean an act of profound foresight, of building something with wisdom, meant to endure. The town rebuilt itself, smaller, stronger, and humbler. Elara never moved back into the town proper. She remained in her dwelling in the Bluff, her solitary life largely unchanged. But she was no longer an outcast. She was a sage. The children of the rebuilt Covenant Creek, and then their children after them, made regular trips to her home. She taught them how to read the signs in the sky and the behavior of the animals. She taught them the principles of stonework, of food preservation, of living with the land instead of fighting it. She lived for another 50 years, a quiet, revered figure, the living conscience of her community. She never married, never sought a family beyond the town she had inadvertently adopted. Her life was her work, and her legacy was their survival. She died peacefully in her sleep one summer night, at the age of 82. The entire town mourned her passing. They did not bury her in the town cemetery. They carried her to the top of the bluff, above the home she had built, and laid her to rest overlooking the valley she had saved. They did not erect a gravestone. Instead, the finest stonemason in the new generation of builders carved a simple, elegant inscription into the granite face beside the door of her dwelling, which they preserved as a sacred trust. The plaque read, "Here lived Elara, who listened to the mountain when we listened only to our pride. She built for the storm, and in her wisdom, we were saved. Let us never forget that the greatest strength is humility."